Does a woman who cuts off her husband's penis deserve to spend time in jail? That's the question that a BC court had to deliberate this week. And at the end of the day, their answer was no. In fact, the 38-year-old woman who admitted her own guilt received what's known as a conditional sentence. Instead of paying for her crime behind bars, she will serve a 2-year sentence, meaning she will stay with her family and be allowed to roam freely. But is that fair? And are women getting a gentler ride through the court system than men are? To debate the issue, we're joined by Toronto criminal lawyer Karen McArthur. Karen, let me begin by saying that this case of Kim Tran sort of lays it all out on the table. A man is asleep, he has been a bed hopper, his angry wife takes a meat cleaver and chops off his penis. This woman ends up with a conditional sentence, which means she go to an English as a second language class and learn some of the social skills that she may not have had before she did this. That cannot be justice, even to you who defend a lot of cases where no one else can have much sympathy for the perpetrators.
Justice doesn't mean slamming the doors behind everybody that's committed a criminal offense and keeping there for as long as possible. Justice means making a sentence that's appropriate for the crime committed and the offender that committed the crime. Fran had very particular mitigating factors that the judge considered, including amongst them that she had 6 children and that she'd been dominated by her husband for some 18 years. And that he was taunting her about his infidelities. He stood there in front of the children and said, "Lady, I'm going to keep on doing this." Yes, she lost her cool.
Now, she lost her cool? He lost something more important than her cool.
And it was flushed down the toilet.
That's right.
Really horrific, aggravating circumstances. But the Parliament of Canada has determined in Section 718 that we send people to prison as the very last resort. You have to consider absolutely everything else.
Even the John Howard Society, that don't want anyone punished for anything, as far as I can see, are in favor of some form of deterrence. What kind of deterrent is Kim Tran feeling today when she sees that something that is going to take this man's sex life away from him forever, make urinating later in life probably impossible, when she gets language lessons? And you talked earlier a little bit of mitigating circumstances. We can never use mitigating circumstances to have a dual system. How would the feminist movement feel, for example, if a husband, whatever the provocation, sexually mutilated his wife, cut off her breasts?
We would be aghast, and we
if
would
you walked out the
but
door
in terms
with a two-year conditional sentence.
of sentencing the person, regardless of the gender, you have to take a look at the background. You look at the background, and you make the sentence fit the background and the crime committed. And it's Parliament, not the feminists. Parliament, dominated by men, they've spoken and they've said prison is the last resort for everyone, as long as the sentence is less than 2 years.
Okay, the Associate Chief Justice of BC, who gave this ridiculous sentence, in his explanation said that this person was a perfect candidate for a conditional sentence because
First-time
offender, had 6 kids, and those kids might end up split up in foster homes, etc., etc.
Right.
My question would be this: if you're sitting in a rape trial and has admitted to a horrific rape, how would the people, the victim, the victim's family, and the feminist movement look at a defense which said, but you got to remember that Jack had a terrible childhood, and on the basis of this being the first time he's ever tortured and raped somebody, and because he had abuse when he was babysat at the daycare center, we're going to give him a conditional sentence. I know what would happen because I've seen those stories. Women would say this is an outrage, this is sexism. And when you start looking at the statistics in the justice system, women twice as likely to be given a sentence than men are, twice as many men getting sentenced to jail. There is something wrong with the justice system, and this kind of horrific case makes it absolutely clear.
You're talking about deterrence. 10 times as many men as women commit crimes. You want to deter Kim Tran? We want to deter women from slicing penises off?
I want to punish Kim Tran for what she did.
You want to throw her away and lock her away?
Yeah, I do want to punish her.
Split her family up. She's separated from her husband. Karen, she's not going to cut off his penis again.
He's got no penis to cut off. That's the whole point.
The crime is done. She's been convicted. She's got the shame in her community. She feels the shame in herself.
And he's got no sex life. And he's got the inability to go to the bathroom for the rest of his life. My point would be, I just don't want to punish Kim Tran. I want to punish anybody, regardless of their past, who crosses the, let me finish, who crosses the line and physically mutilates another person. Gender doesn't mean anything to me in this case. What matters to me in this case is someone took a meat cleaver to someone who was asleep and changed their life forever, and now we're being told it's such a minor offense, giving her an English class will fix it up.
Not just English classes. She has to take care of her family, she has to get probation, she's supervised. If she skips a step, if she does anything awry, she does end up in jail for the full 2 years, plus whatever else, whatever other crime she's committed. We're talking here about making the sentence fit the crime and the offender. It seems to me that what you want, no, Mike, it seems to me that what you want to do is apply a cookie cutter approach to sentencing.
That giving
if you do this particular crime, you should get 5 years, or you should get 10 years. Just ipso facto, without any regard to the, without regard to the background of the offender.
No jail time is a bit strange.
I think it's appropriate that after she's admitted her guilt, that she has to pay some form of a price. Do you honestly believe that sending a person to prison is the way to necessarily, in all cases, get the appropriate price from that person, or is it going to undo whatever efforts she's made?
I would just say that the main reason I'm in favor of stiffer penalties for people who do violent things to other people has got little to do with them. The client, to me, is the victim. I would say, yes, send them to prison, not just because it might deter. I can't say it actually will, and neither can you say it won't. But we do know one thing. They are punished that way. They are taken out of circulation. They are treated by a society whose rules they have violated as if they have done something serious, and they remember that. But you raise an interesting philosophical point to get away from the private parts, the sort of anatomically correct side of this argument. And that is the whole issue of how much do we know about a person's past before we sentence them and how relevant it is. I want to read you something, a little sentence, Judge Ratushny's review of the self-defense law. She says, and this is the woman, by the way, who looked at 98 cases of women who had been sent to prison who had murdered people. And there had been changes in the self-defense law, and she wanted to make sure that no one who was in prison for a crime committed earlier didn't have access to this new development in the law.
Battered women's syndrome, I think, in particular, right?
And she wrote, to be relevant to self-defense, the source of the abuse need not be the victim. Past abuse in the life of the accused may be relevant, and her perception of the danger of herself and her belief in the need to use force. That would mean that some person who had been abused by, say, a first husband could mistakenly see the same sorts of signs that in her mind triggered a reaction against her past. He dies, and this judge is saying that's relevant to the defense of self-defense?
Well, it's relevant. Madness. It's relevant to whether or not the person has what's called the intent in criminal law, mens rea. That's what it's relevant to. We don't judge the crime, we judge the criminal or the accused person. And in order to do appropriately, fairly, and justly, Mike, you have to look at the background, the particular circumstances. Otherwise, what we're doing is the cookie-cutter approach, which is barbaric, and it means that in some third-world countries, you're caught stealing, chop off your hand, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done in the past, no matter if you've got a completely unblemished character. You cross the line once, you get the cookie-cutter approach, and that's what you get. I think that's what you're in favor of.
If someone uses the meat cleaver approach, I think they deserve more than 2 weeks in Disneyland.
Supervised on the outside, but she's still in prison. She's within the criminal justice system. It's a system that Parliament has adopted for a reason. You know what the reason is? We know that sending people to prison doesn't work in most cases.
Let me ask you
this. It's very expensive, and it doesn't work.
We've talked about knowing about someone's past as a kind of a way of making the justice system humane. Well, what if we look into the past of all the men who were in prison for sexual offenses and find, lo and behold, that many of them had a past that might justify the defense of provocation? Do we go back and review all their cases?
Justify the defense of provocation?
Some other defense.
Be mitigating in terms that they were abused when they were children?
Why aren't we going back and searching men's cases out?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that effective defense attorneys should be carefully reviewing the background of their clients. I have handled sexual assault cases where I've determined that my client was abused at an early stage in their life, and although we've had them acquitted, I have always turned my mind to the thought that if they were convicted, I would bring that forward as a relevant towards mitigating the sentence. We're
almost out of time. I'd just like to make a couple of quick points. Looking at the Kim Tran case, I would say that when someone does something as devastating as Kim Tran did, and let's say the words because they're awful, but they need to be remembered, why this case has been handled wrongly. She takes a meat cleaver, she chops off her husband's penis at the pubic bone while he's asleep. She doesn't go to jail. I say that brings the justice system into disrepute. It shows an uneven treatment of women under the courts, and unless it's fixed, Karen, I think that the justice system is headed for a big collision with public opinion. Any final thoughts?
Mike, you can't case in isolation and say that the cards are stacked in favor of women versus men. We try to approach it in a gender-neutral way, and looking at one case to make these big pronouncements to the nation, I don't think is appropriate, Mike.
Well, I guess this is one we're not going to solve in 8 minutes, but I'd like to thank Karen McArthur, who is a Toronto defense attorney, for joining us on the program today.